Hello, everyone. Well, if you are a world-changing founder or innovator, fabulous connections are your best asset. And this podcast will help you by putting the people, planet, and profit through partnerships theory into action. The innovators, leaders, and diplomats we interview are all looking for partners, and that could be you. So no time like the present to find out. Let's get to it. I want to welcome you to Frontrunners Innovate. And today's guest is Christopher Turner, founder and CEO of Emergicon out of Texas. Now, he's going to share with us a little bit about his medical billing company that helps patients and first responders, but together with co-host Drew Aversa, a former firefighter himself, who also serves as a director of government affairs for first responder wellness out of Orange County, California, among other things, which we'll find out about. We're going to talk about the concerns relating to the first responder community and some solutions for making a difference there. So I want to let you know, I am your host, Global Business Developer Mary Curick, and it is my pleasure to connect you to these frontrunners. So welcome, gentlemen. I'm very, very happy to have you here. And I want to start first with Drew. Drew, you're my co-host, so I want to bring you up and have you talk a little bit more about what you do, because your titles go on forever. You do a lot of things. You wear a lot of hats. So share with us a little bit about your background and what you're doing right now.
Sure, Mary, thanks for having me. Great to be on here with you, Christopher. So Drew Aversa, I began my career as a firefighter paramedic in the Bay Area, working on the ambulance, and then eventually earned that badge as a firefighter. Was honored to serve in that capacity. And then from there, 2011, was no longer able to work as a firefighter. So I went back to school, earned my bachelor's degree and MBA, then started working in different business development roles with industry trade associations, the coffee business, and then we had a family business as well. And then from there, just really developed a lot of business skills, consulting, and lived overseas for a little bit. So as you can see, I thought this would be a fun one because you have a lot of change makers from around the world on your show, Mary. So lived in Vietnam for a little, spent time in business school in India and Thailand. And then from there, I've always been an advocate on getting our first responders the care that they need. As you know, throughout the U.S., a lot of the workers' compensation is state dependent, unlike how veterans receive care, which is more uniformed across the board. So we have a lot of work to do. Every state treats first responders differently. And the reality is the impact of post-traumatic stress, the things that our first responders see, is the same across every state. It's a human issue, and our first responders need support. So I'm proud to serve today as Director of Government Affairs for First Responder Health. And under First Responder Health, we have a treatment center in Newport Beach, California, where we see first responders from all across the United States who are seeking help for either addiction, post-traumatic stress, trauma, you name it. So we have a great trauma recovery program. We have equine therapy. We do really cool things where we take people out to the water and do partnered up with a new organization teaching breath work on the outrigger canoes. So alongside with all the EMDR and accelerated resolution therapy and all other therapeutic modalities. So fantastic program. We have retreats as well for leadership for police chiefs, fire chiefs, spouses of first responders. That's a group that's often forgotten, but they deal with a lot of trauma too when our first responders come home, and different challenges within the home that impact the spouse as well as children. So and then we have an ESS, employee support service, like an EAP, that first responder agencies can contract with us as well. So a lot of services, a lot of resources, and then I do leadership keynote talks and published a book on business, how to start a business for entrepreneurs out there that hit the top 100 on Amazon. So that's a little bit about me. Glad to be here with all of you today.
Fantastic, Drew. I already put a name for you. That's out in your area too, so I'll talk to you about that. Christopher, this is great. I have been looking forward to talking to you because I think first responder, information is not widely known. I think it's likely that most people have not even heard about some of the issues that Drew just brought up, and probably some that you'll bring up. You and I talked a little bit about the medical billing side of the house and how frustrating that is for some of us who are either caregivers or have experienced it ourselves if we're of age. But why don't you share a little bit about your background, how you came into doing what you're doing, is solving a big problem, of course. And we'll get into the conversation a little bit further about the different challenges that are facing that industry. But share with us a little bit about you and Emergicon.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Wish I'd gone first in front of Drew.
Oh gosh.
So I founded Emergicon almost 18 years ago, and really what led me to that was I had an interest in healthcare as a kid. Thought I'd become a doctor, figured that out pretty quickly my first year of college. That wasn't going to happen, but I like the aspect, and always have liked the aspect of that healthcare is a people business. It is what it is.
Mhm.
So my background went more into the healthcare finance side, and what I saw over and over again in all walks of healthcare is the business side of it, and the reimbursement side is really the difficult part, and it's where the patient really gets caught up a lot of times. And so almost everybody has a story or an example of how confusing it is and how frustrating. It gets worse as you get into the emergency situation. So pre-hospital, fire and EMS deal with them a lot. Very expensive mode of delivery of care. We all know that. Ambulances, I think, run $300,000 or more. You have aircraft, you have all these things, and you have amazing things that happen. But the more emergent it becomes, the more confusing the situation becomes. So you have patients that really are on the end of that, and not from a billing standpoint, not always for the better. So a lot of amazing things happen with first responders, but then the billing side gets very confused. So you can imagine, Drew mentioned workers' comp across every state is different. You have health insurance, you've got immigration services as a payer, you have crime victims as a payer, you have all these things, attorneys, you have all these different involved parties that are working to resolve essentially a medical claim is what it is. And the patient can get really abused by that if it's not done very, very carefully and thoroughly. And it's on the backside of what is a emergency in many occasions, not always. So my background is what led me to that. I saw it into my entire career, not the least of which I was the CFO for a large not-for-profit air and ground ambulance provider, and they had the same issue with outsourced billing and frustrating patients and low cash collections and all kinds of things that led me to where I am.
Right. Yeah, take to my family. And we talked about this before of having, if you don't really look at your Medicare or insurance statements when they come, then you might be missing something that you get billed for that either didn't happen or there was some confusion about it. And trying to unravel that on the rear end of it takes forever. It may not ever even get resolved. So I do get that. It is very frustrating, especially if an ambulance is involved in, taking someone to the hospital or whatnot. So I appreciate that. So tell us, a little bit more about, where you think you're headed with Emergicon and where it services, the area it services, so that we have an idea, a basis of that. And then from that, share with us a little bit more information about your particular concerns of the space itself as it relates to first responders.
So Emergicon, we're based in Texas. We operate in Texas. As everybody likely knows, Texas is a very large state, and the needs of what first responders have and what their communities they serve is very, very different. So you've got large urban areas. You have very, very rural areas where the local hospital, which is generally not a trauma center, can be 60 or 70 miles away. So we tend to work with several hundred agencies in Texas and meeting their needs and meeting the needs of their community. And that's a very involved process, or a very structured process, I guess I'll say, so that we can continue to serve them and grow. And we have for 18 years now, we continue to grow, and we continue, we feel like, to do better in serving first responders. We're tremendously passionate about that and the patients they serve, because at the end of it, it's all about the individual, and oftentimes an individual who's had to call 911 for themselves or family, and that's a tough situation. So we don't want to be abusive with that relationship. My concerns are really a couple of things. One is, like so many areas of healthcare, there are not enough paramedics, EMTs, nurses, whatever staffs EMS and their capacity. There's just not enough to go around. We have an aging population. I think the last baby boomer will enter into, oh, I forgot the statistic anyway. But we have an aging population. We have baby boomers continue to age into Medicare. And so you have kind of a twofold thing going on. One is utilization goes up as people get older. As you can imagine, it's a rare occurrence. You may need to call 911 as a younger person. As an older person, it might be not all that uncommon. Medicare reimbursement is decent. It's not stellar. And so you have increased utilization in the field for first responders and EMS with pressures on staffing and declining reimbursement. So Medicare itself is not necessarily declining, but the payer, as a payer, the patient population mix is changing. On the backside of that, commercial reimbursement, so those of us who have private health insurance, has been declining year after year. And the legislation that comes out, well-intended, never takes care of first responders. It just makes the situation worse, in my estimation.
Got it. I think you're right with the population of first responders. I think we're in a situation where a lot of youth are not really moving in that direction unless they're pointed in that direction. And I'll have to defer to Drew on that, but I would say, I think I mentioned to you that I serve on the Governor's Advisory Council for Aging here in North Carolina, and we're getting ready for a hunger summit. So we just had a meeting yesterday, and one of the things that came out of it is the population of aging adults over 100 years old is growing, and which is amazing. So the fact that we're not only growing older, we're growing really older is, I think, concerning at the very least, because you're definitely going to be seeing lots more, emergency situations, if not long-term care situations that we got to deal with. But I want to defer to Drew. Drew, what do you think about his concerns? And feel free to add any of your own to the conversation, please.
Yeah, I think we're in a challenging spot right now in our country in so many ways. The recruitment issue is a big issue. I worked for the community college system in a regional role, so I was working with the 15 colleges in Northern California. So I understand quite deeply the impact of the challenges with law enforcement academies that aren't full, that need to be full, and with the challenges of fire academies where people are coming into fire academies, but then they're not able to complete paramedic school because of the STEM, the science, technology, education, math background. So, and then thirdly, Christopher brought up a great point. Long-term within healthcare, right? The costs are going up through and through the roof. So we start seeing, if you are making a decision to enter the healthcare profession, which I always share with people. So when I moved down to San Diego as a young man, working as a paramedic at 21 years old, I made $12.24 an hour. $12.24 an hour. Let that sink in. So you made more at In-N-Out Hamburger than you did saving somebody's life.
Yep.
And that has to change. And the other challenge is that as people are smart now, especially the next gen, you can get on Google, you can find everything out. So why would you want to go through paramedic school that can take you 2 years versus going and getting your nursing degree and then working as a travel nurse and making $200,000 a year as a travel nurse, if not more, and having housing stipends and all these other things. So you can bank money and then go back to a lower cost of living state, have your house paid off in full, have your student loans paid off in full. So all of these different things that happen. And let's talk about the reality of the job as a first responder on an ambulance. Making that wage, if you get hurt, it's very difficult. And then you don't have a job skill that within healthcare, we have different unions and different bargaining groups that also make it competitive, where a paramedic, I can do amazing things out in the field, like an emergency room doctor. But then the minute we come in the emergency room, we would not be allowed that similar position in a lot of states, just depending on how all the politics play out. So therefore, you have somebody who's highly skilled, they're injured, and then they can't go on to utilize that skill set versus nursing. You can go into case management, you can go into working for the insurance companies, you can do telehealth. There's all sorts of different things. So if you get hurt, there are millions of fallback plans that, depending on where I'm in California, so depending on where you are in the US, the numbers, might not be the same, but at least in California, you're going to be making six figures. You're going to be able to afford to take care of yourself, your family, and your lifestyle will not change that much versus working on an ambulance, giving it your all, and then something happens and there's not a fallback plan. So I see that as a big challenge in recruitment within the EMS field. Historically it's been tied to Medicare, Medi-Cal reimbursement rates. I have the expert Christopher, CFO, probably talk more on that, but I just remember that as always being one of the challenges when people go, well, why are they paid so low? It comes down to policy and looking at things holistically. So I would love to see EMS be treated with a lot more respect than what it is, because truly we do things that sometimes nurses don't even do in the hospital, and putting breathing tubes down. Usually a respiratory therapist will do that in the hospital. Having to make a split-second decision of cardioverting somebody who's conscious and then, hopefully works out all right. So those sort of stressful things that we as paramedics have to live with, there just needs to be a lot more respect and understanding for the profession. And then the challenge at the end of the day comes down to lobbying and unions and different special interest groups within healthcare. So can it get better? Can we solve these problems? Yes, but we have to start working together. We can't keep doing what makes America politically strong, which are, again, the special interests, the silos, the lobbying, and all the money, how the money flows. So we have to work together and figure out, how do we have an equitable healthcare system? How do we not take every patient to the emergency room? And how do we take them to a local clinic to get a suture? They don't need to go to the ER. They could go to maybe a doctor's office or a clinic and have a stitch done. So there are a lot of ways to deliver healthcare much more effectively in our country. And unfortunately, the 911 button and that ambulance that shows up is the big thing. And then we get into the legal side where we used to say, you call, we haul, where we don't, the ambulance chasing lawyers, right? I mean, that was always a joke of limit your liability as a provider by taking everybody to the hospital. So states, attorneys, everybody has to be all in on this thing to figure out how to make pre-hospital emergency medicine and non-emergent care much more affordable and a better delivery. So that's my take on it. It's a complicated subject that has a lot of moving pieces.
Yeah, sounds like it. Christopher, you have any comments?
I completely agree that the way paramedics and EMTs are paid is woefully inadequate. And my take on it is that I don't believe reimbursement rates are anywhere near what they should be. When you look at the cost structure to deliver EMS services, it's a very costly service to roll a mobile ICU basically to people's side, and it's something we all agree is necessary. Nobody wants to dial 911 and realize there's nobody there on the other end. So in that vein, we as people and as a country have got to decide, then they have to be compensated to attract people into the field, to be able to offset the extraordinary cost of healthcare. And it's just not even close now. And it's the opposite side of that is even true, where people are very surprised at how expensive it is. And it's not even close to where it should be, given the cost. What people generally think is, my tax dollars pay for that. Your tax dollars pay for readiness. They don't pay for utilization. So if your community has got significant utilization of the EMS service, the tax dollars don't come close, and they don't come close to the way it's funded right now, much less where it needs to be funded.
Interesting. So explain that. I wrote that down. So the tax dollars pay for readiness, but not for utilization. Can you expand on that just a bit?
So, there's a variety of providers of EMS and fire suppression, all that. And a lot of times they're townships and counties and government in some form or fashion. There's some private, but generally there's a tax basis. Even when there's a private, there's generally some kind of a stipend that helps to offset. So that's fairly accepted that fire and EMS services can be provided by the taxpayers of a community. What it doesn't take into account is utilization, meaning that that's different than saying we have staffing here 24/7 with all the equipment ready to go. Utilization is its own cost structure. Secondly, residents of a community, a lot of what can drive your EMS service is people from outside the community. So think about Vegas. Vegas is probably a significant number of people that are visiting that aren't residents and taxpayers of the community. So you have to look at all those things holistically, and then it goes to what Drew said, and they're not even compensated close to where they should be currently. So you have poor reimbursement that's declining. You have people who aren't entering the field for a number of reasons, and Drew didn't mention specifically the emotional toll, but you're talking about a low compensated group of people with very high technical skills, and reimbursement is terrible and not getting better. It's not getting worse necessarily from Medicare and Medicaid payers, but it's definitely not getting significantly better.
And I think you brought up a great point too, Chris. Piggyback on was the emotional toll is huge. And I was just at the Association of Risk Managers conference in California. So different risk managers that handle the workers' compensation program, and really saw a wide range of beliefs and attitudes when it comes to supporting our emergency response first responders, where some cities are extremely progressive, they understand it. Others are, hey, somebody's only has a few years in, it can be costly, da 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 da. So all sorts of different views on that. And then the big challenge when it comes to the emotional piece is exactly what you said. So the new recruits are understanding this. They're asking questions about what sort of benefits do you have? What does your wellness program look like? Do you have EAP? Do you have a counselor? Do you have, do I time off if this is stressful and I need some time off? And am I going to be covered under, in California, in the fire service, we have presumptive loss for mental health. Not every state has that. Am I going to be covered with that? Or, is it going to be adversarial and then my stuff's denied and I'm trying to get help? So the new recruits are actually asking smart questions, and questions we should have asked 20 years ago, because it really, it's their life on the line at the end of the day, their family, their children. If they're not getting the support that they need when they see all the things that they have to see, it includes a lot of death, and a lot of trauma in this line of work. So making sure that they are supported emotionally is so important. Thanks, Christopher, for bringing that up.
Very welcome. One of the
So, go ahead, Chris.
I'll just piggyback on that. And I didn't say it earlier, but one of the reasons that I was drawn to first responders was when I took my first role as the CFO, I didn't have a lot of experience. I had hospital physician side, and I was so amazed at what they did to serve people and the professionalism that came along with that. It was truly astounding to me. And it became really a passion of mine to do what I could to serve them, because I cannot do what a paramedic does, but I certainly understand the finance side of it. And I certainly know how to build processes and structure to get them the reimbursement they're owed and to take care of their patient population. And those things are really very equal. So Drew touched on it there. I mean, most of us cannot imagine what people see. And the example sometimes I'll give staff is, you've got people who have everything from they saved up to put their own backyard pool in, and then their child drowns in that pool. Or you're driving on the way to work in the morning and you're passing an area, it means nothing to you, but last night there was a fatality accident on that section of the road that people were there. That's the world they live in, and they're toned out all the time to go to things that most of us can't imagine. And we're just not treating first responders the way we should. And I think we're starting and going to continue to feel the pinch of doing that, because Drew mentioned it. I can't imagine recruitment is getting better anytime soon.
So if you were standing in front of a lawmaker or someone that was a decision maker, what would be some of the solutions that I mean, other than a broad stroke, we need to fix this, this one situation, are there any small steps? I mean, because you have to sometimes, I think, to get to a big picture solution, sometimes I think that you have to have small steps.
I'll
Is
tell you,
there, Christopher, your thoughts first?
yeah, I'll tell you my piece, and then I think Drew can speak better to the education and recruitment. From my standpoint, Medicare reimbursement needs to triple. I mean, it really needs to triple. Every state's Medicaid is different. It's a very small fraction of generally the patient populations treated by Medicaid. So you could argue it doesn't have to change, although it should. The real culprit, I think, in a lot of this is commercial reimbursement. So people work, their employer contributes to health insurance, they contribute to health insurance, and then when they need it for something like emergency services, it's subject to deductible, it's subject to usual and customary, all kinds of things. And the legislation that's passed about no surprise billing has lumped first response in with that. That basically says the patient should never be surprised with a bill.
Yeah.
They are surprised. You had to use emergency service. That's a surprise. What happens is the commercial insurance payer pays little or nothing, makes the provider fight for any additional money. The patient also is happy because nothing's happened, but the first responding agency suffers more and more, and the commercial insurance companies add to their profits. It's a terrible system. And first responders ought to either be exempt from that, or commercial reimbursement should be set at a high enough level that in the rare occasion that a commercial insurance provider needs to pay across their beneficiary class, it's paid sufficiently. And it's not even close right now. And you're talking about when fire and EMS, a very small percentage of the healthcare dollar is spent there, very small, and it's woefully underfunded.
Okay. Drew, your thoughts?
No, I'm spot on the reimbursement side. My biggest point is to our politicians and our elected officials out there. At the end of the day, when we're denying first responder claims, it becomes private insurance wants to make more money. So we have these people who serve honorably. People say, we support our first responders. Thank you for your service. That means absolutely nothing when you have a firefighter dying of cancer in a state that does not have presumptive laws, and they're taking their final breaths wondering how they're going to get their insurance covered and paid for things that they endured on the job. Suicide, I've lost, people to suicide in this profession and had my own journey. When we're not covering first responders across the nation for post-traumatic stress, and we're looking for ways to deny claims and other things like that, we know the research, if we get people into treatment, they can come back to work. We know if they go into that black hole, the spiral starts, the agency betrayal starts, and people don't feel supported, and their mental health gets worse, and all sorts of things. Their family life gets worse. So by not taking care of somebody, we also are impacting their children. So when we hear politicians talking about, I want to take care of children and families and this and that, you have to have the policy in place. And these are amazing people. The biggest challenge with first responders is that unlike veterans have one voice. It doesn't matter if you're a Marine, it doesn't matter if you're in the Army, you have one voice through Department of Veterans Affairs, you have one voice through the Congress, and you can write your congressman, all those different things. With our first responders, unfortunately, in private ambulance, a lot of them aren't represented that well with their unions and political advocacy. Firefighters, in a sense, so we start seeing these presumptive laws representing different groups. We need national legislation. We need one thing across every state. When it comes, cancer is cancer, no matter if you're in California that has presumptive, or if you're in Texas where there's stories of firefighters dying without their insurance claims being honored. So we need to get this figured out. It's truly atrocious, and politicians love the endorsements of first responders. That's one of the strongest you can get, along there with school teachers, based on credibility, based on respect, and how the community sees us. We need your help. So if you're listening to this and maybe you're on a different side of the aisle, I hope that there can be a bipartisan solution, because at the end of the day, if we do not have a healthy first responder workforce, we do not have a healthy national security here at home of a secure nation with people who are able to respond to the unimaginable. The things I've seen, most people can't stomach at a barbecue conversation. So there's a small group of us that are willing to do this work, to see this stuff day in and day out, and to pay the ultimate sacrifice, which includes our life, if line of duty deaths and all these things. So honorable group of people, right up there with our veterans, who are also amazing, amazing individuals. And we really need to get our first responders the care and the support that they deserve across the board, across this nation.
You brought up a good point about the different unions and what have you that maybe aren't as effective as maybe some of the, like the military Veterans Affairs. Is there not an organization outside of the space that can advocate or has lobbied for them?
There are, there's the International Association of Firefighters, and then typically each will have, their own local in their city department. There's different police unions, and then private ambulance is represented through SEIU sometimes. AFSCME was one. So there's different labor groups that represent private ambulance. The challenge becomes a unity in policy and the unity in legislation, where it currently is like basically the Army would be doing their own thing, Marines would be doing their own thing, Coast Guard would get whatever they get. That's what's going on across the board right now with our first responders, where we need to have that cohesive policy that addresses, even if you work for private ambulance company, that you are getting the same post-traumatic stress care as a firefighter who is working for a city and who's represented by the International Association of Firefighters, which I was a member, is a great advocacy, great legislative group. So we need to just have everybody at the table and figure this thing out, because it's not sustainable the way it's going.
I would hope that there would be an advocate or a champion that would emerge, whether that be a legislator somewhere in a state that is making things happen because he cares so much, or something like that. Hopefully we can find somebody. Christopher, last couple of words from your standpoint, and knowing how you feel about the compensation process or the reimbursement process. Do you see any hope about the tripling of the reimbursement, Medicaid?
I think we're going to, like so many things, I think we will probably get forced into addressing this sooner rather than later. And I think just the way that demographics are going, aging population, people, a growing population, you have just more people in more places, and 911 systems are generally stressed. There were supply chain issues that I think are a bit better now, but there's a lot of strains on it. And with not as many young people moving into the field, it will have to be addressed. It'd be great if it was sooner rather than later, but we know that doesn't always happen. Amazing people that do amazing things, woefully undercompensated from what I've seen. And then patients absolutely rely on that delivery of care. I mean, they just do. Everybody needs to know that it's there. Our focus is on trying to get them the reimbursement they're owed, and to try to take care of the patients they serve so that they're not battered about in the process.
Right. I think the average person out there takes for granted the fact that there is that service in their community, and probably also thinks their taxes are paying for that. And that along with some insurance there that's paying for that, and really don't think much on the other side of the house. Why aren't people hearing about this? Why?
I think it's just because it is not common. And I don't mean that it's not, that it doesn't happen a lot. I mean that the average person, if you ask, have you ever needed to call 911 for an ambulance? Probably greater than 50% are going to say no. And there's a few, but it's always a brand new learning experience for them. So they didn't anticipate it happening generally. They definitely, I think most all the time, they never expected to see any kind of a bill on it, which always surprises me. They're always very surprised that the bill is expensive, considering, and the justification for this always baffles me. They think, well, they only took me 3 miles and the bill was for this. It's not that they took you 3 miles. It's what Drew had to do his whole career to be prepared to take you 3 miles. That's
While we were having a heart attack.
yeah, why are you having a heart attack? The distance was almost irrelevant. It was you called, they were there, prepared to do anything they could, include risking their own life. So it's an uphill battle across the board from, you're talking about paramedics and firefighters that are technically trained, and then in many instances, if you've risen up through the ranks, then you're asked to manage a contractor who does this whole reimbursement arm for you. You haven't been trained to do that. You have patients that are very confused about the process. Basically, everybody relies on the fact that we know we need this. When we need it there, we need it. The problem is that like so many things, there's a lot of risks that go on underneath that we're not addressing. And Drew hit on them very clearly. I mean, when you're talking about essentially the employee population that suffers and can be decimated by what they have to go through, and you're not even addressing that at a high level, that's very concerning.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think in my head, I'm going through several crazy stories of, things years ago that I remember one of the first responders going to a car wreck that was fatal and not realizing it was his wife that was in the wreck.
Wow.
And I mean, I just can't even imagine. I can't fathom, how that even happens. But and where you carry that, where you take that with the rest, for the rest of your life, So there's just so many things that go through your head with that. I ask this question always at the very end. I'm going to ask it of both of you. I never do that. You're the first time and like forever and like ever that I've asked this of both the co-host and the guest. But so who do you need to meet to help you either fix this problem or to help you expand what you're doing? So Drew, I'll start with you first.
That's a giant question, Mary. I've met incredible people.
It is, isn't it? What types of people?
It is. I've been fortunate to meet just truly incredible people. Went to a conference called the Brain at War Conference and met top staff from VA, former generals. I mean, just amazing people who are all committed to helping our first responders. I'd love to sit down with the entire Congress one day. I know that's not possible, but and there's great advocates out there like, John Field, who I've had conversations with for the 9/11, the Zadroga Act. They're amazing people doing amazing work every day. We really, it's the people that make the laws at the end of the day, and then the private insurance companies. So bringing them together and saying, look, this is so vital to our national interests. How do we take care of our first responders? How dollars and cents, figure it out. You guys figure that part out. I just don't want to see another brother and sister lose their life to suicide. And what I really don't want to see are all the family things that are unspoken behind closed doors, continuing generation after generation from untreated trauma and not having the resources that we have. And I'm glad to be a part of the solution with my team, First Responder Wellness, because we do amazing work every day and just hearing the stories of first responders. So I do what I can do, and I'm urging to are in DC doing their thing to, start thinking about this a little bit more seriously.
Perfect. Thank you. So Christopher, you're up.
So fortunately in Texas, we've made some strides to address some of the issues that face first responders here. And I'm not as familiar with some of the aspects that Drew spoke about, but I am familiar with some of the reimbursement that's been addressed here, and we've made some strides. However, I agree with Drew that we need more of a national focus because it's multifaceted. And we need to agree that this is an absolute priority for us as the American people to have access to emergency services, and they have to be compensated, reimbursed, structured in some way that they can continue to provide that kind of care. And right now it is subject to the whims of regular medical billing. It's subject to what insurance companies want to pay based on their own schedules. It makes no sense whatsoever. It's extraordinarily costly and lengthy process to get this type of reimbursement in place. And so you have people that you need there right away, and then they're drug out for, a year on getting reimbursed a fairly small amount. those things could be addressed by Congress, and there could be legislation that says emergency services have to be compensated on whatever, some type of structure, a percentage of charge, or it could be a cost base. It could be all kinds of things. And right now it's not. And as taxpayers on the Medicare side, we ought to also insist that it's reimbursed at a higher level. The problem is if we don't start addressing some of this, you're going to be seeing significant decrease in responsiveness just due to the availability of people to get to you. So my concern is somebody dials 911 and they're an hour or two from somebody being able to respond because there's just nothing available. It's just the simple logistics of what can happen if we don't have enough available people and ambulances and everything that goes on there. And that gets very, very scary at times, that I've seen kind of in local communities in Texas where they are just stretched trying to provide service. So I do think it's something Congress ought to look at. I've never understood why commercial insurance is able to change things from state to state when they are national companies, but they make their rules state by state, and Congress always supports that. It puzzles me. I think that there ought to be some overarching areas of care where they say you have to do this on a national level. That's what Medicare does. I think it a lot of sense to make requirements of them to address things at a national level when they're this critical.
Well stated, well stated. So gentlemen, I thank you so much for being here. You've opened the door on a conversation I bet very few people have even understood or knew was even a problem. Like I said, I think the average person doesn't even think about that. They call 911 and they expect it to be there, that it shows up and they're all happy, not realizing after things go away, that it's the, what's going on afterwards. So, appreciate very much you taking the time to share this with us. And so I'm going to ask you to stay with me for just a second. I'm going to say goodbye to everybody else. And so if you're watching this on YouTube or one of your other channels that you find us, go to www.frontrunnersinnovate.com, where you'll get this interview and you'll also get some bio material on these gentlemen and LinkedIn profiles, a way to connect with them. So if you'd like to get a hold of them and talk some more about it. And hopefully if you're a Congress member, be sure to reach out, because both these gentlemen would like to talk to you. All right. Bye-bye. Happy front running. We'll see you next time.